Has this got a pointer? Yeah. All right. I'm not sure that I'm going to live up to the introduction, but I was asked to share with you all how I made grazing work on my farm, and I took the liberty of changing that to making because I think it's a work in progress. And so, having seen a few of your all's presentations when I got here just before lunch, it reminded me just how much what we do is a work in progress. I was sharing with Bill Payne that having done this a little while now, management intensive grazing is what I would call it, or rotational grazing, managing the grass, that at this point I realize how naive I am about when it comes to thinking about how much I know. The reality is every day I figure out something new or discover something new. So I think that's the important part is to take what you learned today but build on that. This is just a baseline. I went to a grazing school. I was trying to figure out how early on it was, Chris, but I think it was 2001, something like that. Seems like a long time ago now. I guess it is a few years ago, but I also want to begin with, I'm sharing what it is that we're doing on our farm, but I'm certainly not an expert, and this is just what we're doing today on our farm. This is not intended to be a cookie cutter, take this and apply it to your farm and it's going to work. Each location is different. You're going to have to figure out what works for you. And once again, watching some of the presentations, I was thinking about, in my mind, the reality is everything is a variable, including the farm. So it's up to the individual to figure out of the variables what you will not change. You know, you will not probably sell the family farm, but in my mind, you could change enterprises. You could harvest the grass with sheep. You could do it with cattle. You could, you know, the sky's the limit. How you do it, how you go about it, all of those are variables. How you sell the end product. It's like a giant puzzle, and it's going to be up to you all to figure out how to put the puzzle together. Chris asked me why I had tobacco pictures in my slides. I'm a first-generation farmer. I started working for people on their farms when I was 13. Grew up in Lexington, and pretty quickly figured out by helping other people that I just loved agriculture. I love animals, I love plants, love working for myself, like being outdoors, like making decisions, whether they are the correct ones or incorrect, and trying to improve upon those decisions as I go forwards. But the main reason I've got this slide in there is that we grew tobacco. Graduated high school in 1988. I started farming full-time at that point, and the focus of the farm was burley tobacco. We grew tobacco up until 3 years ago, and because of 1,000 different things, we opted to stop. So in my lifetime so far, I've grown a lot of tobacco, but like lots of farms in Kentucky, our focus was on tobacco, and everything else was secondary. And so I like juggling lots of balls in the air and trying to do lots of different things. But everybody doesn't have that talent. Sometimes my oldest son, who farms with me, would question if I have that talent. But once we quit focusing on this and we're focusing more on grazing has gone a lot easier, a lot better, because we're focused on now what it is that is the primary enterprise on the farm. I think it's, for me, the educational opportunities have been huge. The grazing school in the early 2000s, 20-some years ago, I put YouTube up there. I like to go down rabbit holes watching YouTube videos. There's a lot of really good YouTube videos where you can watch other people. I'm a visual learner, so I can watch other people, what they're doing on their farms. My wife questions why it is that I farm all day and then watch other people do it all night. But you can learn from good and bad examples. A lot of times you're focused on the exceptional, and that's a good place to start. But sometimes you can watch a neighbor, watch things you do on your own farm that aren't the best, and learn from that. So I think it's important to continuously learn. Podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts where our operation is scattered out about 30 miles. So there's a lot of truck time, and so there's opportunities to listen to other producers and what it is they're doing and how to improve upon it. Grazing conferences and neighbors. As you're driving down the road in our case, from place to place, you can look across the fence and see what other people are doing and whether or not that works or doesn't work. This is, I came early intentionally to see who was in the crowd to make sure that no one saw their place in any of my pictures or that I didn't say the wrong thing with my comments. But the purpose of the picture is not to look at the cattle, but the fence behind the red cattle are mine. The neighbor's cattle are the other side of the fence. The neighbor's a good farmer, does a good job. But we were just talking about listening to how an animal grazes. And so you can see the cattle in the picture in the background, and that's not why I took that picture. I took it of my newborn red calves. But looking through the pictures, I realized that the neighbor's cattle are grazing grass that's grubbed into the ground. And so if you know how the animal eats, that's going to be really hard for the cattle in the background to nutritionally get what they need. And not that I do a great job, but in this particular picture, there's a little more ground cover in the picture. So anyway, that's an example of learning from your neighbors. This is not intended to be an extensive list of good YouTube videos or channels to watch. I made sure to put Kentucky Forages at the top of the list, Chris. There's a lot of good videos there. Maybe I did have to shuffle my list after I thought about it. But I've been to New Zealand several times and have at this point several friends there. And so in my mind, that's the world's best grazers. And so I watched lots of videos from grazers in New Zealand. Some of these people are dairy farmers, and I think they probably do the best job. And so I think there's lessons we can learn from other industries, even if you're not in the dairy business. And I guess I should have said also, if you have a burning question as we go along, certainly blurt it out or stop me. So in our operation, it's been important to work with what we have. And so kind of going back to putting the puzzle pieces together, the picture, I think most people could pick out what's in the picture, but there's red clover there, but there's a lot of Johnson grass. And so we're not scared to admit that we have Johnson grass on the farms that we're running. We own one farm, and then we rent several across a couple of different counties. In our case, I found it important to work with what it is that we have in front of us. And my experience has been that the animals, for me, it's more important to manage the animals, how long that they're on the pasture and that sort of thing, than it is to, we don't do a lot of spraying and killing out the pasture and reseeding and all of that sort of thing. Just the movement of the animals across the landscape will change it over time. You have to be willing to wait for that change to happen. It's not instant. In some of the properties that we've rented, we're in row crops, and so yes, we've no-till drilled various grasses and clovers and that sort of thing. In some cases, alfalfa into those old crop fields. But fescue, that's another one, and so you just kind of have to know what's on your farm and think about that. For example, with fescue, it's in its prime during the early winter, and so to some degree, we're having to rotate through the pastures, even if there's fescue in there, but we're trying to stockpile those and have some surplus there to go into winter and utilize the fescue at that point. Soil types, I heard you all talking a little bit about soil types. What we're doing, we have enough scale that we think about soil types, but we don't have the luxury always of managing those soil types. And so the majority, thinking that through, all of the farms that we're farming, there's no crops whatsoever other than, in my mind, this is a crop. So we do grow some alfalfa. We do have, predominantly it's all pasture that we're managing. And so it's not like we're going into corn and out of corn into grass and different things like that. The other thing that I think is interesting is, especially keeping up with New Zealand, is you can buy in the seed catalogs from New Zealand plantain and chicory, among other things, but here we would consider those to be weeds. Their varieties that they're selling are improved varieties compared to what just randomly grows in our pasture. But a lot of times we're focused on what it is that's in the pasture, and if it's not, for example, if it's not a orchard grass clover pasture, then, well, we need to spray it, kill it, and go back in with something else. The reality is the animals do really well on a lot of the things that we consider to be weeds. And so it's more important to work with those things, and to some degree, for example, the Johnson grass, we're not trying to allow that to seed out and increase the amount of Johnson grass that's on the farms, but by the same token, we're not upset that Johnson grass is out there. We, as I said, we do, while working with what we got, we do seed. This picture is actually us custom seeding for a horse farm, but but I do want to say that while that's not a focus of what we do, we're not focused on improving varieties of forages out in the pasture, but we're blessed that I think that we've started with a pretty good base to begin with. So that's what's worked on our farm, is not trying to completely clean the slate and come in with the latest, greatest varieties of forages. When you do have to replace what's there, a shameless plug for the University of Kentucky and their forage trials. Certainly, that's a place to look and use the best seed available that's done well in the forage trials. But that is beyond when we have to do that because there was a crop or something that a former farmer had and we had to reseed. That's not a focus of what we're doing. Infrastructure. I think it's pretty important to the infrastructure when it comes to water, fence, shade. Watching your all's presentations, you all were figuring that out, or pretty quickly realizing what it was that you were going to need in the flexibility. Always like choices, whether it's how I'm going to market my animals or how I'm going to harvest the forage that we're producing. And so because of that, we use lots of electric fencing. We're almost predominantly all city water across the farms. I guess I should say we have about 1,300 acres of pasture that's on 10 different farms in Franklin and Fayette County, and one Scott County farm. We use 2 or 3 ponds across that many acres, so the majority of it is all city water. We've had pretty good luck with the city water. I like the 2-wire high tensile electric fencing. We have a tremendous amount of that. The majority of the 1,300 acres is all electric fenced with city water. We use GPS to get our distances right for water. I can't say exactly that all the properties are gridded off, but to some degree, that's the reality. Working in loading facilities for the cattle, that was something I saw you all touching on. That's pretty important. So in our operation, we have places where we exclusively put, we do beef cattle. So we have places that we have cow-calf, we have places that we have stockers, and then we grass finish beef for Whole Foods. So we have finishers as well. And so I have farms that we've learned over the years that finish cattle better than others. Those are the ones with a lot of Johnson grass. The cattle do really, really well on Johnson grass. The rougher places with the right kind of cattle, that's a variable. The right kind of cattle, a cow-calf will do really well on rougher, what I consider to be rougher ground than the stockers or the finishers. So we've got all three phases. Typically, we don't have all three phases on the same properties. And so because of that, we'll have stockers on some farms that maybe there's no catch pens whatsoever, and so we have portable pens that we will take and catch the cattle at the end of the season to move them to locations to be wintered. The proximity to where the facilities are, how to get cattle on the farm to where the catch pens are. There's a group of 7 of us that are selling to Whole Foods through Marksbury Farm in Garrett County. Marksbury does the processing, and so Whole Foods takes 44 animals a week, and so it's pretty important that the 7 of us that are doing this are able to access the cattle in the pasture and get them to Marksbury, because it's not a thing of, well, we couldn't catch them today, we'll get them next week. The expectation is 44 head every Thursday, one way or the other. Originally when we started out, we used lots of the bottom right corner, the blue tub. We had lots of plastic pipe laying on top of the ground with quick couplers and water troughs. We use a little bit of that now, but not a lot. And we were using lots of polywire. We still use a lot of polywire, but not in the same capacity that we originally did. It's pretty handy to be able to lay out a farm and figure out what works, and if you guessed right where the right location was for the watering point and that sort of thing, using the temporary system or stuff, because you can move it. But once you have that figured out, my favorite way watering points is the larger picture. So that's a 500-gallon tank. We call them diamonds. Those are Terra gates that make all 4 corners of the diamond, and so 4 pastures, 4 paddocks can feed the water tank, and the cattle can go all the way around the tank. They're still not coming as a mob or a group because we're trying to stay within the 600 to 800 feet, but it's still pretty handy that they can go all the way around the tank. We have several locations where originally we would put the tanks in the fence line with the fence over top of the tank, and those work, but moving forwards we'll do everything like the diamond.
Are those concrete tanks?
Concrete tanks.
And do you have problems with freezing in the wintertime?
We put, they do freeze. We put a piece of wood in each one of them. The bigger concern is busting the tanks. But in the wintertime, we do have to go around and break the ice. Each tank has a shutoff and a pressure regulator, and so we can turn those tanks off in the wintertime to help negate issues that we might have with freezing. But this is by far my favorite water setup. I like the permanent system. Part of it has to do with that we're running around all over the place checking cattle and that sort of thing, and so we don't have a lot of time to be setting up polywire and moving fences and that sort of thing. And so I kind of like the set paddocks where I can go, open a gate, look at the cattle as they move to the next paddock, and then shut the gate, and we're good. The top right, I see Anna Arthur in the in the crowd. She helped us with this was a EQIP project, and so that's along a creek very close to Kingland in Fayette County. And so on that particular property, it was too far. It just didn't make sense under the circumstances to put city water back on that property. So it's hard to tell by the picture, but it's a stream crossing watering point. And so we're able to access multiple paddocks to that point. And that particular farm has a couple of these access points. It's roughly a 70-acre property. The piece of wood for freezing, it helps it's almost like a shock absorber. And so it helps to keep from busting the sides of the tank. But when you have weather like we've had the past couple of winters where it's below freezing for a week or so, the piece of wood's not going to do you a lot of good in those circumstances. So, oh, maybe a 3-foot piece of wood or something like that, like a landscaping timber that's about 3 foot long, or a piece of locust or anything like that, and it'll float in the water and give it. Probably the pine is superior to the locust. The locust is going to be pretty solid and not much of a shock absorber. But
So why didn't you use like a 4-ball water instead of the concrete?
thanks for prodding me onto why you wouldn't do that, Chris. I remember I served on a water management committee for Kentucky Farm Bureau for several years, and so Mr. Higgins, was Mr. Higgins part of this process? Not at the grazing school. That's too bad for you all. But but anyway, his focus is on lots of things up at Eden Shell and other places. But he's done a lot of work showing there's not enough water in one of the ball waterers to meet the needs of the cattle. Boss cattle will basically dominate and control those sort of waterers and prevent, he's got videos that prove this, prevent other cattle from getting there. So considering water drives dry matter consumption, that can't be my limiting factor as to why they're not going to go graze and put pounds on. And so for that reason, we have to have enough water capacity for the number of animals that's in the field. And so that's why I like we're doing some of the tire tanks. On these particular properties, Keenan was here. These are in Franklin County, some of these pictures, and that was an EQIP project as well. And so the landowner, was about 500 acres, and we wanted some consistency and not a variance with the tires, different size tires and that sort of thing. They like the looks of the concrete tanks. It doesn't make sense, but we get along very well with the concrete tanks. Our winters seem to be milder than they used to be, and so we have some freezing, but it's pretty limited. The other thing that we've done, getting in the weeds on waterers, but we've taken thick plastic, like greenhouse plastic, and have covered one or two of the tanks. We have a lot of these tanks, we're not covering them all, and you put a strap around it and cut a hole in it in the wintertime, and it acts a whole lot like the ball waterers, but on a much grander scale. And so solar will keep the water warm enough to where really cold weather, they can, there's just a skim of ice that they can break with their nose. So we probably have 50 of these tanks, maybe more than that. I think there's 23 of those tanks on 500 acres, plus there's all the other places. We have a lot of these tanks, but in the wintertime, we're not going around busting the ice on all these tanks. We're moving the animals around. So it's specific to where the animals are. Those 23 tanks in Franklin County, wintertime, you might be using 3 of those at any given point. So it's not like you're having to break ice on.
So are you emptying those things?
No, sometimes knowing that watching the weather forecast, you may have cattle in the paddock, turn the water off, let them drink it down before you move them on. But they seem to do better with more water in them than trying to drain them down, because now you're getting to where you could freeze the ball or the float. So we do, in our case, we do all our own fencing, and we typically have paid other people to trench in the water lines and that sort of thing. But this is just an example of some of that. So we use the H braces we like, but they've discontinued them, a white composite post called a Pasture post, a Pasture Pro post. Unfortunately, I'm not sure why they've quit making those, but it's an insulated post that you can drive in with a hand driver. So the only wooden posts that we were driving were the end post and if there was a bend in the fence and that sort of thing. We try to utilize any cost share that's available. So we've several of the projects, the water and fence, we've been lucky enough to qualify for and utilize equip. We also have used CAPE. I assume everyone in the audience knows what the acronyms are. Okay. Well, equip, that's through NRCS, and that's more, so lots of the projects have been equip, and so it's a little bigger scale. And so fence and water, seeding, all of those sort of things can come under equip. CAPE, that's through the Ag Development Fund, through the state, but that would be on the county level, so it'd be less money. Some of the same things can be cost shared. In that case, it's typically going to be 50%, whereas equip is not intended to be 100%, but you're closer to whole with equip than you would be CAPE. There is state cost share through the, I may have my term wrong, but through the state soil conservation. Is someone here that could correct that?
Division of Conservation, you're correct.
Thanks, Adam. Division of Conservation. So there is a state cost share that's available. Local conservation districts, there's cost share for various things through those as well. So lots of places to get financial help to get you on your way. I mostly put this in here because I just like the picture, but this again it doesn't matter where it is, but it's in Franklin County, one of the places where we run cows and calves. And listening to some of the conversation earlier, I think one of the things I heard you all talking about was weaning cattle, and you were going to build a traditional permanent fence, and that way you could keep the animals separated. I follow the logic. We have pretty good luck with just, we're not weaning any animals in this picture, but the polywire and step-in post closest to us, we can get along pretty well doing that sort of thing. Typically though, we've been taking the calves, and your all scenario, you didn't have multiple farms to move animals, but we typically wean the animals and take them to a different location.
You use fence line weaning?
No, we completely remove them. We have fence line weaned, and we've had luck doing that, but we typically completely remove them and take them to a different location. You can't see in the picture, but there was also discussion about that how you were going to get your electric fencing around. I think I heard someone talking about that. And so behind the church is a boundary fence with a woven wire fence there with an offset wire that we've added to that. We have several offset wires on the farms to get the power around to where we needed other electric fences. When we have a short on the fence, the first place that I go to look is along the offsets where we've ran the single wire. 99% of the time for us, that's where the short is in the fence. We rarely ever, if ever, have a short in the 2-wire high tensile fences that are newly constructed. It's almost always a deer that jumped over a fence and a rusty piece of barbed wire broke and laid across the offset. There's no choice but to do the offset, but the thing I always think about is that we control cattle with a single piece of polywire, but us, between our ears, think that it takes this monumental physical barrier to control them. And so we build these expensive fences that actually cost us money and time. And I think about the single wire offsets that we put, that other than the cost of the dozer to take out that old fence, other than that part, which is very expensive, it would be just about as cheap. I've already basically built the electric fence with the single wire offset. I don't know if that's making any sense, but it's, you've spent the money on the fence, but now I'm going to have trouble with it because of the old fence that it's connected to. So just have that in the back of your mind, that that's one of our pet peeves, is we have a lot of trouble with that. So there's, I said we utilize lots of different things. The bigger picture on the left, that's actually credits to Jimmy Henning. He took that picture several falls ago. That was some weaned calves at that point. And they're on fescue. That's a little bit early to tout the benefits of fescue. That was probably October-ish when we were there. But smaller picture, upper right. Unfortunately, I don't have any fence or cattle in the picture, but that's alfalfa that we've grazed. So we utilize whatever it is that's in front of us. The bottom picture is cow-calf pairs, and we were rationing out some grass, trying to lengthen the rotation. And so we had just moved a piece of polywire forwards, and so the cattle are somewhat lined up because they've got fresh grass. And so for me, the more I mess with this, the more fun it is to see what you can do and how well you can get them to utilize what's in front of them. So the tough time for us is wintertime, especially grass finishing for whole food. So we do some custom work. We do a lot of hay work in the Lexington area for other people. So we have hay equipment, but we make alfalfa and some wheat baleage, and that's what we feed. The bottom right picture is a Hustler bale feeder. We have more than one of these because of being spread out on multiple farms. We started doing that about 3 seasons ago, and I prefer it for what we're doing. So we rotate the animals on all the places all through the winter. And so they're getting some stockpiled grass, but it seems to, in our case, it improves the pasture. We're not having a sacrifice field or area or any of that sort of thing. And so we'll stay in a paddock for 2 or 3 days and feed, and then move to another paddock. And so we're just constantly all through the winter moving around. And so we've had way better luck not pugging our pastures or demolishing our pasture by doing that. And it seems like it heals itself because you keep moving them through there. Sometimes we'll go to move the animals, and it had warmed up and rained overnight, and you think you've destroyed it, and you come back a month later and you can't tell that anything had happened. So the trick is the duration of the animals on the ground, not so much what they did in that short amount of time. The top right corner is, it's probably hard to see, but there's a little bit of green grass there. And anyway, that's our preferred system, is to let the cattle pick through the winter and then feed the baleage that they need and keep them moving. So we have, we're not now, but we have done a lot of other things on pasture. We, pre-COVID, we had a small flock of hair sheep. We had turkeys, that's the bigger picture. We had like 60 ewes, and we were doing about 500 turkeys for Thanksgiving. And then the bottom right is Cornish cross broilers, chickens. We were doing 20,000 of those on pasture in chicken tractors. And so listening to some of the conversations about multi-species and how you were going to rotate them through, those were good guesses for a September day while it's raining outside, but practical experience tells me that it's harder to keep these different species. They're moving at a different pace, and so it's hard to make them move through the pasture at the speed that you want them to. And the other thing is, someone mentioned, I think they were going to have the sheep graze in front of the cows. I would do that in reverse. I would do the cows to get the pasture down to something that the sheep want to utilize. But But I know that was a hypothetical equation that you all were working through. COVID caused us to change several things. I won't go through the whole list of things, but Marksberry Farm, who's our processor, everyone knows how tough it was to get beef animals in to be processed, and so at that time they opted to sell their poultry line and for the most part focus on beef, and so that was just an opportunity for us to shift gears and do something different. The chickens were the most profitable animal on the pasture per acre. We were making $750 to $1,000 profit on chickens per acre. And the chickens annually we would make $750 to $1,000 an acre with chickens. In clarification, they were in these, what the slang term is chicken tractors. That square that the chicken tractor is on, in a season, that's the only time chickens would be on that square. Is that one day?
Were you supplementing their feed at all, or just?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they were on full feed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they get a little bit, we could do a whole 4 hours on chickens on pasture, but it took us 7 weeks start to finish on the chickens, and so I like numbers and running trials and that sort of thing. And so we did lots of just on-farm trials, and they were fun because you could tweak one little thing and see in 7 weeks a difference. Whereas with the cattle, sometimes 2 years later, you're trying to remember who the mom and the dad were of the calf that turned out so well. So this picture is several years old, so disregard the prices. But so we're selling to Whole Foods. This is the meat case. This is actually in Lexington, and so our group sells to Whole Foods in Lexington, Louisville. Kentucky has 2 stores, and then all the Ohio, Pennsylvania, and I think some of the Indiana stores. And so that's where all the 44 animals a week go, is strictly into the meat case. And we're a step 4, so there's an audit every 15 months that we have to go through to be certified to do this. And my audit was 3 days ago, so it's been a big week for me. And we passed, so we get to keep doing what we're doing. But I probably should have started with this slide or had it sooner, but that's, in our case, that's the end goal. And I mentioned earlier that I like options and opportunity, and so I like being certified to be able to do this, but it doesn't prevent me in a market like the one we have now. I have to make sure that I keep this supplied, but we're still able to capitalize on the current market that everybody else is enjoying at the stockyards. But the other 6-7 years out of 10 that it's not as great, then we're just focused right here to try to make sure that we're being paid for our grass. If I were going to leave you all with anything, it would be, I heard someone, speaker once talk about that if you're going to wait to start until you know everything you need to know, you'll never start. And so just be willing to make mistakes, be willing to learn. Lots of financial opportunities out there to help you achieve what it is that you're trying to do, but you're going to have a little bit of scratch and claw to you to find that information and utilize it, and then adapt. Some people have said, for me, being a first-generation farmer, not having anyone telling me that, well, we tried that once and it didn't work, you don't want to try that it's easier for me to make changes. And so maybe that's the case, but we're always looking, thinking, trying to figure out. Our goal, our mission on our farm is to pay for our lifestyle through farming. And so that can look like that's a wide open, on purpose mission. We've grown hemp. That didn't go well. We've grown tobacco. We've tried grain. We'll try anything that's legal, trying to see if we can sustain ourselves and make a living. And you have to have an open mind. If you're very focused on, no, we're only going to raise beef cattle and we're only going to sell them at the stockyards and we're not going to move them, you kind of know the result. And you could be successful doing that, but you got to be open to making changes. We do put this in there. This was, as I said earlier, be willing to make mistakes. This was a young helper. That's something that we started during COVID. We've had 6 or 7 high schoolers to this point that are helping us. Not all at the same time, thank goodness. But this was a reel that was brought back after they took a fence down, and they had no idea how that happened. And so I showed them how that happened. And do you have the So I brought these. There's 2 or 3 of these. This is some of the farms and how they're laid out. That's a watering point, watering point, watering point. There was an existing watering point here. This is actually a odd-shaped farm, but it's 125 acres. There is a pond. A couple of times a year we flash graze around the pond, but we don't utilize that for water really. We've got 2-wire high tensile cutting this. There was an existing fence that broke the farm in half, a woven wire fence, and then the perimeter is woven wire. But we used high tensile electric, cutting this field in half, this field in half, this field in half. Then we used poly wire through the season to quarter these fields. And so we end up with, I think there's 16 different paddocks on that particular place on 125 acres. This particular field, we do a wire kind of at an angle. We utilize GPS on our phones also on things like on this to put the poly wire. Typically we set that up at the beginning of the grazing season sometime in March. And for the most part, it gets left, other than to take it up to clip pasture or something like that. But trying to use our phones to help us to figure out, make sure that the paddock's appropriate, that we've split that because it's an odd shape.
Your power for your fencing, is it all solar power?
On this particular property, there's no homes or anything on it. There's no electricity, so this farm is solar. Yes, please.
How many animals will you run on that farm at one time?
So for me, the pasture rent is it's not free, but it's fairly inexpensive. And so on the 125 acres, currently we have 68 stockers or growing type animals there. But I'm more concerned about having forage and making it all the way through, because for us, for the most part, it's not an option of, well, it's droughty, the prices are good at the yards, we'll just load them up and sell them. That we got to make sure that the 44 animals keeps coming to Whole Foods so that they know we're reliable. So because of that, I'm more interested in having stockpiled grass than trying to see how hard I can push it. This is another place, 125 acres. It's long, slender property. There were some existing fences here and here. Through Equip, we fenced off this creek. So now we have 4 corners up front. And actually, the picture of the cow-calf pairs behind the church is just there. This property rolls pretty good. It goes back to Elkhorn Creek back here. It's a creek bottom. But these are all the watering points. High tensile electric here. This creek got fenced off on both sides. And so you get the gist of it. But there's several, this is actually an alfalfa field. And so we'll make baleage, make small squares to sell, graze it to clean it off. we're about to drill rye into it. That's something that we started a couple of years ago, and so we drill cereal rye into the alfalfa. Makes pretty good feed with the alfalfa the following spring, and then you can't tell that the rye was even in there after that, after you take it off. All right, Chris, the last one.
Is those permanent waters, you put those waters in, are those permanent?
Those are the concrete waterers with the diamonds around them. And then this property is 250 acres, permanent fence all the way around. There was some existing permanent fences through here. This particular side of the farm, about 125 acres, there's a beautiful lake with no animal access, and it's in a low spot. But this entire side of the farm, there was no water and no fence. And so this is all electric fencing. And then there's the diamond concrete setups at each of these points. We referred to this area as the Johnson grass field. When we came there, it was, we were convinced that Daniel Boone was forging a trail through there. It was 7 foot tall and just woody Johnson grass. But this is one of our favorite areas. But we do have a rotation, so we don't camp out back here. But the cattle, we finish cattle on this property, and they really, you can see them put the weight on that Johnson grass. The picture with the red clover and the Johnson grass was in this area back here. All right, thank you, Chris.
All right, is there a couple questions? Todd?
We'll start over here.
Have you gotten your cattle to eat chicory, and if so, how?
If they're being rotationally grazed, and lots of people, when they hear about what we're doing, they're convinced that we must have dogs and that it's this rodeo every day to move the animals from one spot to the next. But they get used to the routine, and so if you put on that last farm, there's one group there that there's 80 animals in the group, and they're going into 6-7 acres. They'll eat everything that's in the paddock.
So you've got them to eat it by making it so much.
Giving them no other choice, yeah. Yeah. But one thing that I've noticed that they don't like to eat first is alfalfa. Like if we put them in an alfalfa field and there's some grass waterways and that sort of thing, they'll always go to the waterways and clean those out first and then come back to the alfalfa. I think it's a little bitter. So some of the plants are bitter, but if that's what they have in front of them, they learn to be pretty aggressive about it. So, yes, ma'am.
How many full-time and seasonal and all that employees do you have for all of this?
I am glad my wife is not here because she would elbow me right now and say not enough. Before COVID, we had 6 Hispanic workers but that was mostly because of tobacco and chickens and custom hay and all of that sort of thing. We do about 400 or 500 acres of hay in addition to the pasture. It's a couple thousand acres that we're farming, but it's primarily me and my oldest son, Aaron, that are farming full time. We have some high schoolers, but that's the extent of who's doing the work. Once the pastures are set up, it's I don't want to use the word easy, but it's a routine. It takes us almost as long in our case, to drive around to look and to move animals as it does anything else. Yeah. But we need because we're involved with other things off the farm, so we need some more people. but people are hard to find. So. We don't. We stopped. It's a long, complicated answer, but because of changes in tobacco and the poultry line going away, and there were several labor-intensive things that went away all at the same time, and so we kind of shifted gears and went the direction that we're going. We really need one full-time person, and we get along pretty well. I had a philosophy of if it was hard to do, if it required work or effort, you could make money at it. If it was easy, if it's round bales of hay, it's hard to make money on round bales of hay. But if it's little squares, you can make money at that because no one wants to do it. So So with that philosophy, a lot of the stuff that we were doing was very labor intensive. And so we've slowly, Aaron will tell you that not fast enough, we've gotten away from some of that stuff. So, any other questions? I should say that, so I live on top of all of that. I live in Lexington, just off of Alumni Drive, just off of campus. So for me to go to any farm takes me 25 minutes. And so Aaron lives, we actually have some stuff in Clark County. He checks farms from that direction back to the horse park. I'll start at the horse park and go to Franklin County. And so we have a system as to how we check things, but it's 30 miles from Franklin County to Clark County. So we have redundancy in equipment and that sort of thing that's on the far end, so we're not trying to move equipment around. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Do you calve in the fall or the spring or both?
We did have 3 calves yesterday, but we calve in the spring. I remember several years ago, I shared this with the auditor a couple of days ago, that one of the other producers for Marksbury said that they're a spring calver, and the auditor said, well, I see here your first calf was December 28th or something. He said, yeah, spring. So, yes, ma'am. I'm glad you asked that question. So it's different in all parts of the state, I'm sure, but two different properties. The one in Franklin County that's 500 acres. There's another one towards Clark County that's 300 acres. Both of those landowners found us. Well, but it had to do with the stuff that we're doing. So I'm not suggesting to you all that if you do this, people are going to come to you, but they were frustrated with the same old things happening and wanted to see something in their minds more progressive. You all could debate whether it's progressive or not, but one landlord commented that they thought their farm was dying and they wanted it to not be. We took those farms. One of them we took because both of them, the landowners had worked with who was there to get them to do this sort of thing, and they wouldn't. That made me feel better about going somewhere and setting this up, that I would be there for a while. And so we have 5-year leases is how that works. But that makes a huge difference to have landowners that's what they're wanting to do. And the best part is, for the most part, they let us do it.
Have you had a problem with landowners participating, say, in EQIP or GATE?
No. And where we're renting, we end up doing, we're the people that are doing the EQIP, and so they just sign off to allow it to happen. Yes. Yep.
Well, we probably need to move on.
Yeah. Thank you all.